Turn, hellhound.
Cut.
A cut? What? What for?
You were quoting Macbeth, Mr. Butler.
That's a Scottish play, Mr. Fiennes. We've been over this before. Now turn around 3 times, spit and swear just to lift the curse.
I hate you.
We hate alike.
That's the right line.
Oh, aye, right.
Coriolanus, starring Gerard Butler and Ralph Fiennes, directed by Ralph Fiennes. Yeah, in all seriousness, this was actually a pretty solid movie. I mean, I've always been a Shakespeare guy. I had never heard of this one prior to this movie, but when I saw the cast, the setting, how it takes place in like sort of modern day Italy, it's presented as kind of like a war film, like a modern war film. I was like, wow, that's really fascinating. I see that it's directed by Ralph Fiennes. And I'm like, all right, let's give this a shot. And honestly, it did not disappoint. I never would have taken Ralph Fiennes to be a shitty director. The dude he's just on top of everything that he does. Right off the bat, I mean, you got like these 2 dudes, Ralph Fiennes, Gerard Butler. They're both like equally matched warriors, and the movie literally opens up with like a knife fight. Coriolanus, he's this Roman general, and his enemy Tullus is played by Gerard Butler. You got like the bureaucrats that are just like stirring up all this trouble, and you have this great warrior Coriolanus who fought for like family and country against these rebels. And there's this whole thing where like the way the story is portrayed from the beginning, like the rebels are the bad guys. And you only assume that because you're following Coriolanus' character. But essentially, I mean, you kind of get a deeper perspective as the movie goes along. You come to find out that Tullus and Coriolanus are actually quite similar in that they are both, you know, honorable warriors. And even as enemies, like they hate one another. That's where that line, "we hate alike," comes from. They hate one another, but they respect one another because they are like worthy adversaries. And all the people of Rome are kind of like snobby. Coriolanus' mother is sort of like a Lady Macbeth kind of character. Basically, these manipulative bureaucrats, they work everybody up into a lather. They, you know, through the press and through everything else, they start like slandering Coriolanus' name. And it gets to a point where he's basically like, you know what? I'm out. He actually goes against his own family, and he meets up with Tullus, and the 2 of them join forces. It gets to the point where it's like they're about to lead a full-scale invasion of his own nation. I don't want to like really, I mean, it's based on a play, The Tragedy of Coriolanus, that's been around for, you know, well over 400 years now. So a lot of people, especially Shakespeare fans, probably know how it ends. It's a Shakespearean tragedy, so, you know, usually there's a lot of death and betrayal. It's a good, fun movie, and the way, the fact that he was able to translate it into such a solid modern war movie, I found actually quite impressive. Plus, unlike certain adaptations of Shakespeare films, I did not get the impression that any of the actors in this movie didn't know what they were talking about. Their lines were a natural read, and even Jessica Chastain, who plays his wife, she's the only American actress in the entire movie, but she does a British accent, just so it's not, like, weird. Which, and this is just a personal preference on my part, the dialect that's used in Shakespeare sounds better. It sounds more natural with a British accent. So I was kind of happy to see an American doing a British accent, and I know that that was at Ralph Fiennes' direction. There's a bunch of people out there who say, oh, well, you know, Shakespeare, like, back in his time, like, it actually sounded a lot more like us. It's just, particularly in dramas, I think that a lot of the times when Americans try to do Shakespeare, it sounds really, really dweeby. Like, you know, if it's a comedy or something like that, that's great. And especially if you, like, treat the lines like dialogue and not just poetry, which I think you should do anyway, then that could work. But a lot of the times, like the Leonardo DiCaprio version of Romeo and Juliet, for instance, I couldn't stand him, and I like Leonardo DiCaprio. I couldn't stand Claire Danes, and I like Claire Danes. I liked, like, Pete Postlethwaite and the actor's name escapes me, but the guy who played Michael from Lost as Mercutio. They were the only two people in that entire freaking movie that I actually got the sense knew what they were talking about. I don't know if it was the directing, that the director was like, oh no, say it like poetry. It just doesn't sound right to me, but that's a personal preference. I went off on this ADD tirade about that, but anyways, Coriolanus, it's a really solid movie. Even if you're not a big Shakespeare person, if you like kind of like modern war movies, I would give it a shot. Just give it a chance. I mean, you know, if it's on Netflix or whatever, especially if you don't have to pay for it or if it's a cheap rental, give it a shot. Because I guarantee you that like the way the movie unfolds and the way it's directed, scene by scene, you'll, even if you're not very familiar with like Shakespearean language, you'll kind of get the basic gist of what's going on. Definitely a very original, cool take on a very old Shakespeare story. Good movie. Check it out, guys.